it was one of those, it just kind of, yeah, just sort of came through, because I think what we were doing is we were certainly talking diversity, really, weren't we? We were talking about sort of interesting experiences and how to kind of treat the concept of diverse audiences in marketing and stuff. And I think from that, then you then revealed to me, your interests, should we say, which obviously I want to discuss a little bit more.
Sure.
And I think from there, then it started to get really interesting, because then it was kind of like, oh, right, okay, so you are very experienced in kind of seeing sort of almost both sides of a diverse kind of audience, if you like, because you've got the professional side where you're having to kind of almost look outwards to a customer, but then you're also the recipient of, I guess, and I want to sort of find out a bit more about this as well, kind of judgment and views and impressions, I guess, because people will have perceptions of what you do, and sort of basically who you are as a person then, because that gets sort of intertwined with that. And I think it is all this whole kind of thing about judgment, really. So I just wanted to kind of explore where judgment and impression and, yeah, kind of diversity all kind of sort of blend together, and just kind of see what we can do with it, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's you've made it sound a lot more interesting than I think I perceive it to be sometimes. But yeah, I mean, when you put it like that, it's quite layered in terms of there's a lot of aspects to it. I think that are good that's good to talk about. In terms of, as you say, I mean, I come from quite a customer-facing role, or have been in the past, less so these days. It's more, I now take more of a backseat and look at more things like customer journey and how we can create automated journeys for customers, and preempt their behaviors, in order to give them, I think, quote unquote, how we describe it, a delightful experience, within our marketing. So I suppose from that side, I'm quite conscientious of however people perceive us as a brand. But at the same time, I mean, cat out of the bag, I do like to do drag on the side sometimes, and I have done that at my Christmas party before. And what this has led to is, I think it was a Christmas party 2019, and what this has led to is, just to pick up from what we were discussing before, I think, was that, in the wake of things like Black Lives Matter in 2020, obviously that's been a thing for a long time, but in 2020 it really seemed to take off, and a lot of corporations, especially corporate companies, I find particularly, I mean, I work in quite a corporate environment, started to pick up on this sort of, okay, well, we need little groups for all these sort of, I don't call, well, they are, I suppose, yeah, they are minority groups. So we had like a BAME group, and we have an LGBTQ plus group within the company I work for now. We have a disability group as well. I mean, these are all still being kind of formed. Some of them don't have leaders yet. Some of them don't really have many people in them yet, but they want to try and form them so that so that the business can give everyone a voice, basically. Which is all very well intentioned, and I can see what people are trying to do. It's just very interesting watching it manifest in a company like the one I work for, which is quite previously. I mean, I've worked there for about 3 years now, and it's one of the top 3 places to work in the UK. As rated on Glassdoor very recently, and we have a fantastic culture. Or, I was just thinking about this morning. We had a fantastic culture, but over the last year, I've really started to notice how that has, given everything that's happened and the disconnect that we have with everyone, that's started to fade a little bit. Particularly with, like, you see it with a lot of new starters that we have that have sort of not, they've not had the same induction that we have. They've just been plonked in front of a computer screen and given induction video after induction video, and and that's all they know. And you can see that it's you don't nearly know someone well enough having just known them on the other side of a screen. I mean, I've been talking for a whole year almost on the other side of a screen, but that's well established. But when you're trying to actually work with someone, it's a lot different. So I think in the context of that, I was just thinking this morning, these groups work very well in terms of if you are from a certain background, whether it be your sexuality or your race or whatever that may be, these groups are actually quite effective because we're not all in the same space together. So it's good to know that we have somewhere where you can feel like you're heard when maybe you're not necessarily, I don't know, when you're just literally sitting at home alone, doing nothing. I mean, I have the added, benefit of that I have an established rapport within the business. You know, I showed up to the Christmas party in full drag, and everyone loved it. And it was a real, you know, it was a real moment for me in terms of, you know, like, yeah, everyone just loves it. This is a great company to work for, and no one seems to bat an eyelid, and everyone just was so, you know, appreciative and complimentary, and it was a fantastic evening. And to go from that, which is like, you know, the peak of, you know, sort of acceptance, to just us all being apart, there's no space to do that anymore. Yeah, I think it does have a place. However, I mean, I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling on about a lot of different points. But however, I feel like long term, it's this idea of safe spaces that that I'm not too keen on. I say not keen. They are essential, but they're not sustainable, I think, is my viewpoint. We need safe spaces now because people need to be able to listen to each other, but it's not a long-term solution, because if we all just put ourselves in little safe spaces, how are we ever going to learn anything about anyone else outside of that safe space, if that makes sense? So the LGBTQ plus group, which I want to say I was roped into, whether since I did drag at the Christmas party, everyone's like, oh, this looks like an interesting character. I thought we'll get him in. And really, I don't know. I really didn't know what more I had to add to this group, to be honest, because the motivations weren't entirely clear. You know, there's this whole idea of, you know, we want to educate and raise awareness of people within the LGBTQ plus spectrum, if you will, which is all very good intention, but I see it as, I don't know, it's still kind of finding its feet a little bit. So I don't want to call it out and saying it's doing anything particularly wrong. Because, you know, we're all going on this journey together, it seems. But also there seems to be, we've come up with this huge manifesto. We were split up into little groups to come up with little, you know, little sentences to make them a manifesto. And, you know, we've made a little page on the internal website and things like that, so everyone can see what we're about. And then you just wonder where you go with this from there, in terms of, you know, yeah, we can invite in speakers and people can voluntarily show up to learn a little bit more about people's pronouns and, you know, the thing, you know, transgender issues and being non-binary and all these things that are real talking points at the moment. And it's a shame, because I don't want to bring it back to the fact we're all stuck at home, but it does limit you a little bit in terms of, you know, what we've always wanted to do and what I've always really wanted to do. And maybe this is me just being a little bit, you know, not too serious, but I've always really wanted to put on like our own little, you know, personal pride festival, so we can all get together and, you know, have a bit of fun, but also just learn a bit about each other at the same time in the same space. Whereas if you're just being, the idea of just the word educate, I think, doesn't grate on people that you're trying to convince and actually educate, because it makes them feel like you have a one up almost, which is a sad fact. But yeah, that's, I don't know, maybe that's a different topic altogether, but I feel like there's that, I don't want to get in trouble for saying anything that's too untoward, and I'm willing to be educated on certain things, of course, but I look at some people that, you know, are not within this spectrum maybe and are so far removed. The people that you're not trying to convince necessarily, but you just want to, you know, you just want to help them understand you. You know, you just want them to understand where you're coming from. I'm not going to listen to you necessarily from my experience. If you say, well, you know, well, if you're willing to be educated, then I'll teach you. It just sounds like, you know, like that one-upmanship of stuff, and people just don't respond to that very well, I don't think. And this whole idea of, you know, we're fighting for acceptance. I've come to terms with the fact that I don't need anyone to accept me, because that gives you some sort of power over me. I may need you to understand me and where I'm coming from and listen, you know, and I'll listen to you. But sorry, I feel like I've gone a huge tangent just then from wherever we were talking about. I know we need to probably bring this back to marketing now, but this is more internal politics within business, within corporations.
It is, but I think it is, and I think it's almost like that's where it almost needs to start, because if we can't get this stuff right internally within the organization or within our sort of peer group, and we can't start, and I think you used some really interesting words there, which were listening, acceptance, and education. So I just want to kind of pick up on those three to start with, because I think certainly the listening one is that I still see a lot of examples of people who will fold their arms. You can just tell by their body language, I'm not going there. I'm not interested. It's not my world. I do not want to be part of it. Almost like they're going to get sort of sucked into this world that is fear, basically. They don't want to experience the love and the fun that you're talking about, and that kind of let's have a great time and really enjoy this, because it's based on fear. So it's like it's the fear of the unknown. So they don't want to go there. So, and I still see examples. In fact, I know examples of people in my friendship group who will openly declare that that is them. It's like, no, I'm not touching any of that. Oh no. And it's and to me it's just it's divisive, but it's really it's just so negative, but it is fear-based. And so again, we need to, I think, sort of appreciate that there is this section of the community, of the population, who are at one end of the spectrum. You talked about a spectrum there. I think they're at the other end of the spectrum to this, complete immersion in this world of acceptance, and they're kind of really down the other end. And to me, it's both quite sad, but also it introduces this word education, because, okay, we don't necessarily need to help them to accept. They don't necessarily even have to believe that it's a thing, because I think some are still in quite denial that actually there is more than just male and female, for example. And all these other letters which I don't understand and blah, blah, blah. There's all these arguments that come back. They don't have to accept it necessarily, but I think you came up with the really interesting sort of concept of just be aware of it, just be awake to it. And even if you're not going to be, so say, educated in a formal sense, so you totally understand it, you understand where everybody's perspectives are, and you're going to accept it. It's just being accepting of difference, maybe. And I think for me, those are the three sort of key things which have to start at home, be it literally at home, personal life, or at home in the business. And I think, your employer is sort of leaps and bounds ahead of many industries where, you can still see very bigoted views. You can still see very old traditional, as you might call them, old-fashioned views of acceptance. And that isn't just with, LGBT. It's race. It's just difference, really. And you look at the organization, and you look at the business, and you think, my goodness, you are carbon copies of each other. You've got the same age profile, you've got the same backgrounds. It's just, you are literally robots of each other. Now, again, I'm not judging or saying that's right or wrong, but I think it puts those people in a challenging position to kind of even open the door to exploring this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's that whole tribalism thing, and I think it's something that's really affected by things like, I don't know, it's also a lot of times it starts with things like social media. I find, that you are, you go back to things like The Social Dilemma, which I think I watched. We watched you do a webinar on that one, and then watched it myself. And the whole idea of that, we are marketed to based on what this algorithm thinks that we want to see, so that then puts us into little like subsections of society. And then but then we do that within business as well, where we don't, we employ people that they're pretty much like us. I know that where I work, there's the guy who does our in-house designer is always, whenever they say we're doing a photo shoot within the office for the website or for promotion purposes, whatever, and they'll say they always say we need more diversity, and he says that really grates on him. And he said in a meeting once, he's like, I just hate diversity, with no malice involved, but more the case of like, I mean, what more can I give you other than that? You like, what do you want? There's only a certain amount of people within the business that fit the criteria of what they think diversity is. And it's interesting, isn't it? I think it really does start with, I don't want to say employers, because of course, it can't be like a box ticking sort of action, I don't think, because you should hire the right people for the job. Essentially, it shouldn't necessarily be based on color of skin or sexuality or whatever. But I think the issue is there should be no prejudice. I mean, that's the main thing, isn't it? Really, I think there should be no, there should be no reason for you to not hire someone based on anything other than, are they capable of doing the job, I guess. And then that's how you build out a more diverse workforce, I guess. It's interesting, because I think a lot of people, there's been a lot of protests and people talking about it, and it's almost like, I mean, this is all very good stuff, but it's almost like people want it to happen instantly as well, and this is something that will take a long time to come around, but now we're seeing the seeds being sown, I think, in a lot of companies. I mean, but as you say, there are still ones out there which are quite bigoted and sort of, you know, stuck in their ways of working with only one particular kind of person. And it makes me a bit nervous, I think, if I ever think about leaving where I currently am, because it's almost like, I don't know if I'd find anywhere quite as, you know, I've spoken to people who I work with, and like, you know, some other gay people at work, and they say, and this is a man who was like, God, like a good few years older than I am. I mean, I'm 27. And he was, I'm not going to assume his age, but he's, you know, he's a lot older than me. And what was so nice is that he came to, I don't know, we were out having drinks, I think, after work one time, and he said, like, oh, how did you find working at Abcam? And I was like, oh, it's all right. You know, I mean, that was all, you know, being a millennial and being like, yeah, I mean, it's all right, isn't it? And he said, oh, I've never been more out at work. And I'm just like, oh, I mean, that for him, you know, that's really, I don't know, that's something about that was really nice to hear, because, you know, it's that from when you're coming from, and you know, when you're of a generation and you are LGBTQ plus, and you come to work, because there's that whole idea of you putting on a front and just not really being yourself and things like that, and the fact that, you know, I showed up in bloody dress to sorry, censored myself, a dress to the Christmas party, um but you know, and it was just fine, is a huge leap forward. So it's good to kind of be a trailblazer in that, but yeah, it's, I don't know how you then filter that down to smaller businesses and influence them, but maybe it does start with, you know, little groups like this and us having conversations about it in like bigger corporate environments that then filters down through to, you know, because I think the natural progression of someone like me, if I was to leave, would be to go somewhere that's slightly smaller, and then I don't pass on the good news or the good word onto these other small businesses, however you want to call it. But I think it's, yeah, it's having the confidence to take that leap, and actually and as you say about approaching people in the right way, that's because these people, as you say, will be completely closed off to wanting to learn anything new, and it is just a very human trait of just fear of the unknown. But it's about making it accessible for them, I think, and making it seem on a level that they can understand, without having to be like, you need to accept me, you know, or you need to, you know, because that just, yeah, it's a bit of an old move, I think, is that one. I think we're a bit more than acceptance. It's more just kind of tolerance at this point, because I don't think people tolerate people as much anymore. So sorry to bring this back to marketing, if I can, in some way. um, in terms of what we do, as marketers, I think there's real influence there. In terms of the fact that as marketers, I guess we can influence decision making and, you know, behavior within a certain group of people to an extent. Um, and yeah, I think it also, yeah, that then harks back to this idea of, you know, from bigger corporations, we can then set an example, I think, to other businesses of how we should be behaving as marketers and who we should be, you know, targeting with certain things.
I'm interested in your view on something that I've seen, I think, probably in an increasing amount of sort of cases and examples, is certain individuals within organizations. And again, it's interesting you say about smaller organizations, because I think they have probably a lot more flexibility to move more quickly on this, as generally small organizations do. But I still am seeing quite a bit of, and I'll use the word resistance to kind of go here in this subject, because of fear of getting it wrong. So it isn't necessarily fear of being bigoted and totally traditional and not willing to accept change. This is more of a fear of, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I say it's TGLB? And what's the Q and the plus? And the, you know, I know it's confusing. I have to check, you know, in my mind, and I'm using this phrase all the time. It's a constant challenge, I think, for a lot of people who, for them, this is actually on the periphery of their normal everyday living. Okay, so they're not thinking and breathing this all the time, but they know they need to engage with it, either personally or professionally, because maybe, you know, a friend has come out, or maybe at work they've been tasked with setting up a project team to see whether they should be taking it seriously, for example. I still think there's fear of, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I offend somebody? And this word kind of acceptance that you've used is quite an interesting one, because certainly from my perspective, and I could be completely wrong here, so I'm just going to share an observation, is that I think that if somebody's kind of new to talking about this kind of topic and this subject in its broadest sense,
Mm.
there is a kind of almost a resistance because of what we see in social media and what we see in the media, that if you start talking about it and you make just one little step wrong, it's going to come crumbling down on you, and you're going to be either at best embarrassing yourself, but worse, you're going to be really offensive.
Mm.
Now, I know that for lots of people, this isn't that sensitive a topic because, like yourself, you're very, very comfortable with who you are as an individual. You're not looking for acceptance. You're not craving that, well, everybody must love me because of who I am, because you're
Mm.
comfortable in your own skin. And that is just amazing, because what a great starting point. But I think a lot of people are broaching this subject for the first time. This is even before they start to use it in their marketing. Could be sat there thinking, oh, this is too scary because I'm going to offend, I'm going to be insulting, I'm going to get it completely wrong, and I'm just going to embarrass myself as I do it. I mean, are you seeing that? Do you experience
Oh
that?
yeah, I get that all the time. Like I'm very much I still get things wrong, quote unquote. I feel like it's very normal for that to happen. I don't feel like it's a tricky one, that one, because on one hand if say if like I don't know, someone like people have called me out before for for things that I do, and and they said, oh, someone called me someone called me a cross dresser once. And for some reason, like, it didn't offend me, but I was just kind of like, oh, no, I'm a drag queen. I'm not a cross dresser. Like, cross dressers just wearing someone else's clothes. Um, but then in that moment I saw them just kind of, but I wasn't trying to like correct them or anything. I was just trying to like say, like, I mean, that's, I don't know. But then they're saying, oh no, I'm so sorry. And I was kind of like, oh, but I didn't want you to now feel bad about like, saying the wrong thing. It's not, I and I yeah, it's but then I also say the wrong thing. I've embarrassed myself in front of trans people before, that and you just kind of end up on the spot and you don't want to say the wrong thing. Eh, a lot of the time I feel like these people, particularly like people who are actually in the communities, people who are gay, lesbian, bi, transgender, anywhere on the spectrum, are usually um that they're not so easily offended necessarily. I don't know. In my personal experience, as long as they're comfortable in who they are, and there's no sort of sense of insecurity, then you can slip up and apologize, and it's fine. I see no problem with that whatsoever, as long as you acknowledge it. Because it is confusing. There's far too many letters in that thing. It's I still find it confusing and a bit unnecessary, unnecessarily complicated, to the point where it's almost like, I don't know, sometimes I see it as, sometimes we try and make it hard for anyone to ever understand it because we don't want them to. And that's not really what we should be doing. It should just be a case of happy, open conversation. I feel like the problem sometimes comes with, and where you get a lot of the noise on social media particularly, is, and and it's all from a very with the best intentions, but sometimes a lot of the allyship, I think, that comes with the people who are trying to speak up for these people who maybe, talking specifically about the LGBTQ plus community, people who are trying to stick up for these people sometimes make it a lot worse than it needs to be, I think, by trying to defend, but also trying to correct other people about something really they have no personal um, you know experience in necessarily. I feel like that's where it gets a little bit problematic, and that's where people then have this fear of not wanting to speak out because they're scared someone's just going to jump straight down their throat and say that that's wrong. And like, yeah, and it's almost like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes I've almost been embarrassed by these people who sometimes stand in a pride parade and lecture very unsuspecting, very, I don't want to say simple sort of people who just don't exist in this world, about, and then just and just yell in their faces and give them a whole big lecture, and it's kind of like, well, you don't even really know what you're talking about. Like, so I feel like that's where there's a problem, and that's where those people, I think, need to, that particular set of people, come from a place of their own insecurity of trying to fill something that's probably missing, maybe, or I mean, but as I say, it does come from a place of good intention, of wanting to support, and we need that support within the LGBTQ plus community, but it needs to be on the same, it needs to be all on the same level of perspective. I think. So that's my 2 cents on the matter. That's what I see from personal experience. Is, they're the ones that end up riling people up, and then people are like, well, I don't understand it, so I'd never want to associate with that again. And those are the people that that really annoys me. Those are the ones they always put on the news or on talk shows, and then they always make a ass of themselves. Then they go viral, and then there's no point made. And yeah, it's usually the ones you see on something like what's the one Piers Morgan just left. They'd always stick someone on that with a completely radical view, just so that Piers Morgan can yell at them, and then we're all laughing at this person and siding with Piers Morgan, and and then we're just back to square one again, and there's no actual conversation to be had. What we should be doing is, rather than laughing at the fact that or just asking probing questions about being transgender or all this kind of stuff, is actually just talking to people on a human level, I think, rather than just I remember seeing an interview once of like, there was she was a drag queen on RuPaul's Drag Race, and then she transitioned into female, and she was on a talk show in America. I think her name's Carmen Carrera, and she but the person who was interviewing her, I can't remember her name, but she was basically asking, like, oh, so how did your operation go? How did that all go? And Carmen was just sitting there being like, I don't really want to talk about that because that's incredibly personal. I'd rather talk about all this work that I'm doing, her actual life, rather than, what's between your legs. I feel like that's maybe a different topic altogether, but we're just putting the wrong people in front of the masses, I think. One, either they're like really radical allies, or we're putting the right people in front of them, but we're asking the wrong questions, and it just doesn't seem right to me. I feel like we need to be speaking to people on a human level, and not through either a mouthpiece of someone who hasn't been through that experience, and also we need to be asking the right questions. So yeah, I can't remember what your initial question was, but
yeah, but I think it is that human thing, isn't it? I mean, the original question was about fear and fear of getting it wrong, and I think you've really touched on something there, which I think for everybody listening to this is going to be sort of really quite interesting. It's the one thing of, yes, okay, you might feel fearful, particularly if you're doing this in a professional sense, that you're going to really put the company or the brand, in an awkward position, because if you say it wrong, or you do it kind of wrong, or you get that wrong image, or just the tone of voice isn't quite right, you're going to really be up against it, and everything's going to sort of fall down like a pack of cards. But I think you really sort of highlighted a key point, which is, if we can keep this human, then it's all going to be fine. And I think that's a really interesting point, that the letters don't matter, the perspective doesn't really matter. As long as we're talking authentically and openly as human to human, then it's kind of okay, because we're going to listen, we're going to hear a little bit more. We're not hopefully going to judge as much as we would if we're coming from a place of fear. We're just coming from a place of humanity. And I think that's just a nice, it sounds a little bit cliche, but I think there's something intrinsic in that about getting it right by thinking about human to human contact. I just wanted to bring in the whole kind of thing again about marketing, because obviously a lot of people listening to this,
yes,
either marketers or they've got, but it is interesting giving that kind of sideways sort of off-piste angle, because it brings the context to this, and then we're not just talking marketing theory. So I think it's really important. So thank you for that. I think the thing for me though is that, as marketers, and I've been doing this whole kind of customer segmentation thing. So if you're not in marketing, customer segmentation is basically breaking down your audience into little bite-sized chunks of people who do things in the same way. They use your products in the same manner. They might look and sound the same. They might live in the same area. So what we're trying to do is group people consciously and proactively into little subsets. Now, there's two ways of approaching this, and I've been challenged throughout my career about doing this. Well, that's generalizing. And I'm saying, well, yes, it is actually. And that's stereotyping. Well, yes, it is actually. And as marketers, it's almost like we're given this access all areas pass to be able to do that. So we're given the green light to be able to proactively stereotype, which of course flies in the face of everything we're talking about here. But anyway, I'll go with this just for a moment. So if we are, as marketers, allowed to stereotype, So I'm allowed to put you personally into a group of other people in a definition that I create so that you can be seen and see from my business. I look out and I see you and people who are like you, and this is my definition of like you, in a specific group. Then I can provide marketing, I can provide services, I can provide communications to you. So it's very, very targeted to what you might want. Okay, so that's kind of the definition of marketing communications.
Yeah.
If somebody was looking at this and said, yeah, but you've stereotyped, I would say, yes, I have. I consciously stereotype because I want to give you the most appropriate stuff. And if I just give you this generic vanilla flavor, you're not really going to like it because it's not targeted at you. So to me, that's always been my mantra, which is that stereotyping is good. And I think for me, stereotyping with an authentic, positive, feel good, and actually stereotyping because of love, not fear, is a real positive. And so for me, that's where kind of marketing really scores, is because yes, we're allowed to stereotype as marketers if our intentions are good. So if we were now to take this into this whole kind of diversity thing where we're being told, don't stereotype, treat me as a human being, how do those two things kind of sit side by side?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point actually, because yeah, as marketers, I mean, I do it every day. I mean, making segments um for email campaigns. Like it's yeah, so we we do stereotype people on a daily basis. It's really interesting looking at it from that perspective because yeah, even from this diversity perspective, from a marketing perspective, yes, it is a positive stereotype because ideally, and you're right, if you do it from a place of love and natural, not nothing negative, nothing that's hurting anyone or causing anyone any distress, then absolutely, yeah, and it's only going to enrich them and make them better because we're showing them something much more personalized. I mean, I'm all for that. That is, the more personalized we can be in a customer experience in marketing, the better, rather than just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. In diversity and things like that, I think that's where there is a mixture of negative and positive stereotypes within different, within certain groups. There's, I mean, just to pull someone's out the hat, there's the stereotype for people of color, particularly black people, to I don't know, now I may be teaching on the line here, but more inclined to steal, maybe these really horrible stereotypes that have been carried throughout history, which simply just aren't true. And these are the ones that need a bit more squashing, I think, than any others. I mean, obviously that would never make its way into anything, anything marketing. That's a bit different. There's certain things I think there are celebrated stereotypes about certain communities. Like I'm only talking from perspective of the gay community, and that that there's this confidence aspect to it. I mean, that take aside, and the whole the idea everyone thinks, oh, gay men are effeminate, and I'm kind of like, well, why is that necessarily a negative thing? What's wrong with being particularly effeminate? If anything, I think that was more of a powerful thing from my perspective, anyway. So yeah, I think it's a case of there are within the diversity sector, take aside from marketing segments, things like that. I mean, looking from a diversity perspective, there are still negatives and positives to focus on. I don't like the idea of just squashing every stereotype, because some of them definitely still exist. I can't begin to tell you the amount of personal shame sometimes I feel when I do something that I know is incredibly gay, and I'm just like, and you're just a bit like, oh, such a cliche. I can just be like a normal person, but normal's also a bit boring. So I don't. Yeah, I feel like you're always going to be walking that line anyway, regardless. Especially when we're much more online these days, and you've got all these opinions running around. There's no point trying to tick that box like you would, but like I was saying, when you try to hire, a more diverse staff. The same thing with your marketing. You can never be, I don't think, completely non-stereotype. The point is just not to go to the extreme, I think, and not to say like, oh, I don't know, like this. I'm trying to think of an example that's now I feel nervous because I'm scared I'm kind of blurt out a stereotype that may necessarily be not true. Maybe a good example is, maybe it's not exactly a marketing example, but I remember there was I think it was like a conservative campaign or something they put on Twitter, and it was something about, I don't know, it was just something about not voting conservative or anything like that. But it was last year, and it was pretty soon after George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and the amount of comments of people just going like, "Oh, you've jumped on this bandwagon." It was just a black person. It was just a person of color that they were using as like this model for, I don't know, like housing or something like that. I don't know. And the amount of like horrendous comments from people on Twitter of just saying like, that, oh, you've all jumped on this bandwagon now. I think there was something similar with the BBC as well. It's kind of like BBC, blah blah blah. Like there's just horrible comments that I won't go into. So I feel like whatever you do, people will just there are just trolls, and there are people that will say that this is right and this is wrong. Um, the point is not to deliberately like alienate anyone, from uh feeling excluded. It's this whole idea of, it really makes me laugh when you've got these poor little white people who are all just kind of like, oh god, it's just it's the they're everywhere sort of argument. I think whenever they see an advert with a person of color on it, and it's almost kind of like, well, that's just simply not true, is it? You like it's yeah, and I feel like there will always be people that are willing just to bring that up, depending on the social, economic, political climate at the time. And I don't really know what the answer is on how you squash that, because they're just people insecure behind their keyboards, with nothing better to do, is the way I see them. Um, not willing to listen, not and again, then no one's in this face-to-face space actually seeing other people and seeing people and what they actually do in their lives. They're just seeing one version of them in some marketing activity, and and yeah. So in answer to running the line with stereotypes in marketing, I mean, just don't be a knob about it, I guess, is the one thing. But I think it's good that we see more LGBTQ representation in a lot of adverts. There was a great Starbucks advert I saw, which was like, it was very wholesome actually, and it was very subtle. I don't know if you saw it, the one where I think it was a trans boy, but he kept getting misgendered uh, as his girl, as his female name, in every sense of the word. People were saying like, "Oh, you should dress more like a girl," and of course he's got quite short hair and all this sort of stuff, and just being labelled and labelled and labelled. And then he goes to Starbucks and he says his name, which is a masculine presented name, and then they write it down, and it's kind of like, there's no, you tell us what you want and we'll give it to you, sort of thing. And that's just, and it wasn't no in your face sort of, but the annoying thing is that people see that and then they just trigger, and it's just like all they see is the fact that someone's pushing an agenda, and it's like, no, we're just giving more visibility to something that hasn't had a lot of visibility in the past. What people forget is that it's been, I'm sorry again to generalize, and this is not something I like to say, but it's been like straight white man day for a very long time. And I think people maybe are slightly threatened by that. Also, as you say, it's that fear of the unknown. I think it's an uphill struggle. Again, this stuff isn't going to happen overnight. If you just keep showing people different perspectives, then I think the idea is that people will hopefully succumb to it. But also the danger is, I think, of like, because we've got all this tribalism on social media, is that people will still go away to their little bubbles and they will bicker about this and find a way to tear it apart. Yeah, and that's where things like safe spaces are great, but also do a little bit of a disservice in that we're not connecting with anyone and actually having those conversations. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah,
I think it does. Yeah, and I think for me, again, you've just sort of hit on something which I think is really quite pertinent. Is just this humanity thing. It is just about, okay, the perfect scenario. And you said it right at the beginning of your answer there, which was, it's almost like if we can do the marketing, the communication, the listening on a one-to-one level, that's the ultimate kind of answer here, isn't it? Really, is you and I are talking here, so I'm listening to you. The rest of the world is out there happening, things are going on, but I'm actually listening to you. And it's as simple as this. really, isn't it? It's not
Yeah,
about, I'm not judging you, I'm not forming an opinion. Well, I suppose as a human, of course, I'm forming opinions as we go
yeah, I
through
mean,
it,
yeah,
but
that
I'm
happens.
forming the opinion that, yes, you're a really open person. Yes, you've got some very honest views. Yes, you're eloquent. You've got some interesting perspectives, and I should listen because I'm being educated, is the opinion I'm forming. So it's kind of, it's forming opinions without trying as hard as you can to not judge and
Mm,
not sort of say, yes, but my opinion is better than yours, or yes, but I'm more worthy than you are, or whatever. All of those things go out the window, and you
mm,
just listen, and then you respond human to human. And I think for marketers, for business owners, for kind of anybody in their personal lives, what is better than that?
mm,
Just listening to
yeah,
one-to-one communication and forming an opinion, forming a judgment, but without connotations. I think, because we're all going to judge, we're human, that's what we do, but without the connotations of expectation and negativity and, oh right, well now I know that, I'm going to do this.
mm,
Taking all of that out and just taking it in, just allowing it in,
yeah.
but without the fear that we've been talking about before, and just welcoming, yeah, just kind of yourself, allowing yourself to kind of learn and experience more. I mean,
Mm,
surely that has to be the way forward
yeah.
for all of us, really.
And it comes from both sides, really. Like if you are, quote unquote, the oppressed, generalized like that. But if you are of this community, trying to, you know, help someone, get someone to understand you, the way to go about it is not to yell in their face about it and tell them that they're wrong. The world is not black and white; it's grey, and that's just the way it is. Um, and I think that's what I always keep in the back of my mind whenever I'm hearing something that maybe I don't agree with. It's kind of like you listen, and then if you still disagree with them after listening to them, then you just have to have the courage of your conviction that what you know is right. Um, but just going back to the marketing thing, I mean, it's interesting from it's almost like sometimes, yeah, back to the whole stereotype thing. The almost like you can't do anything right, but also businesses are still taking a bit of time to sort of adjust to this in terms of LGBTQ plus. It's just a bit of a mouthful to me. That it's so when a Pride season comes around is a very good example, I think, of like the amount of, especially with I think with Primark, especially, I think that I saw that was a bit of an issue once upon a time when they had a whole range of stuff that just had rainbows on it, but there was no sort of connotations to Pride. They weren't giving to any particular organization. It wasn't like if you buy this T-shirt, X amount of money goes to these organizations that help the LGBTQ plus community. And that's that's where it can kind of, I think, draw some divides, I guess, being that, yeah, I sorry, I haven't quite formulated this thought process yet, but it's that cashing in sort of aspect, and that then creates divides between the community and the consumer. It needs to be for the right reasons. Just putting rainbows on things just because it's that season and because everyone else is going out in the city and enjoying Pride, and you're there selling stuff that's got a rainbow on it. It's not necessarily ethical. I don't think that's the other side of it from some of these bigger brands, I think. um but yeah, I mean, it is nice to see a lot of these, you see a lot of logos around Pride season. If you go on websites, they're often changed to a little rainbow, but then you do question kind of like, okay, are we just cashing in on Pride, or are you actually doing something behind the scenes? It's that transparency, I think, that sometimes we need to see from organizations that are trying to clearly make a connection between the two. Because then that obviously upsets a lot of people if they know that it's all just for sort of vanity.
I think for me, this is, we've touched on so many really, really interesting kind of topics here. What I'm going to invite everybody listening or watching to this podcast to do is to kind of put any questions, comments, or thoughts in the message thread, which you'll find below. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, if you go to anchor.fm/Neil Wilkins, you'll see that you can actually comment in there. And if you're watching this on the YouTube channel or on my website, again, message thread, put any comments or questions in. And we will endeavour to come back with a view, and it will just be a view, and it won't necessarily be the right or wrong thing, but let's keep this debate going, because I think, and I thank you really, really for your time here, Connor, because it's just been so fascinating. We've touched on so many things, I think, for marketers, business owners, and just pretty much everybody really to be thinking about.
Mm.
So thank you so much for your time coming on the show today.
No, it's my pleasure. I've had a great time.